Summer 1881. Dakota Territory. The sun pressed down on Pine Creek like a hand made of white fire. The dirt street running through the center of town was rutted deep from wagon wheels, the edges marked with hoof prints baked hard as stone. Heat rose in waves from the ground, turning the air thick and bitter. A woman walked alone down that street, her shadow stretching long behind her. She moved with her head down the brim of her bonnet, doing little to hide what could not be hidden. At 7 feet and 3 inches tall, she stood over every man, woman, and child in Pine Creek, over every building except the church. Her height was not the gentle kind. It was the kind that made people stop mid-sentence and stare. Her name was Kyla, though no one in this town knew that yet. To them, she was just another drifter, another strange thing passing through on the way to somewhere else. But Kyla was not passing through. She had nowhere left to go. The dress she wore hung loose at the shoulders, patched so many times the fabric no longer matched itself. The neckline had stretched and torn over the years, showing more of her chest than she wanted. But she had no other dress, no other anything. The boots on her feet were stiff and too small, the leather cracked at the toes. Every step sent a dull ache up through her legs. She kept her eyes on the ground, but she could feel the weight of their stares. The women outside the general store, the men leaning against the saloon posts, the children who stopped playing to watch her pass. She had learned long ago not to meet their eyes. It only made things worse. Her hands were clasped tight around a few coins, just enough for flour and coffee, maybe a bit of salt if there was any left over. She had been walking since dawn, and her stomach had been empty since yesterday. The coins slipped from her grip before she even reached the steps of the mercantile. They hit the wooden boards with a sharp clink, then bounced into the dust. One rolled toward the street. Another spun in a lazy circle before settling near the edge of the porch. Kyla dropped to her knees quickly, trying to gather them before the wind carried them away. But the wind was faster. The coins scattered, spinning across the dirt like small, desperate things. She reached for them, her fingers scraping the ground, but they kept moving. Her breath came quicker. Those coins were all she had. Without them she would not eat today, maybe not tomorrow either. A shadow fell over her. She froze, her hand still stretched toward the dirt. A man crouched beside her, his movements slow and deliberate. He pressed his thumb into the dust, pinning one coin, then another. His hands were large, calloused, the kind that came from years of work. He gathered the rest without hurry, then stood and held them out to her. "Wind's bad for keeping change in your hand," he said. His voice was low, even without mockery. Kyla looked up at him for the first time. He was tall, though not as tall as she was, 6'4", maybe more. His hair was dark brown, worn a little long, and his jaw was shaded with stubble. His eyes were gray-blue and steady. They did not move past her face. They did not flicker down her body or linger on the torn neckline of her dress. They stayed on her eyes, patient and unhurried. She did not know what to do with that. "Guess I wasn't watching close enough," she said quietly. He tipped his hat once, a gesture so simple it almost felt strange. Then he glanced toward the street, then back at her. "You headed anywhere after here?" Kyla hesitated. She could have lied, could have told him she had somewhere to be, but something in the way he asked, like he already knew the answer, made her speak the truth. "The old Miller barn," she said. He did not flinch, did not frown. He just nodded once. "That place won't keep the rain out." He paused, like he was weighing whether to say more. "I've got a room out past the cottonwoods. Clean bed, bolt on the inside, supper most nights." Kyla stared at him. Men did not offer things without wanting something in return. That was a lesson she had learned young and learned hard. But there was no smirk on his face, no glance down her body, no step closer. Just the offer, plain and direct. She thought about the barn, the cold boards, the wind cutting through the open walls, the ache in her feet and the knot in her stomach that had not loosened in weeks. She thought about how many times she had been told she did not belong anywhere. "All right," she said finally. The man picked up a sack of oats he had set against the mercantile wall and stepped to the side, letting her fall in beside him. They started down the street toward the road out of town. People watched. Of course they watched. but neither of them looked back. They walked in silence for a long time. The ruts of the main street gave way to a narrow wagon trail lined with dry grass and scattered cottonwoods. The sun had dropped low enough to cast long shadows, but the air still carried the heat of the afternoon. Kyla kept pace beside him, though her legs burned. She had been walking every day for weeks now, and her body had learned to move even when it did not want to. The man's stride was steady, the sack of oats shifting slightly on his shoulder as they walked. He did not speak, and neither did she. She listened instead, to the faint creak of leather from his suspenders, to the crunch of his boots against the hard, packed dirt, to the wind moving through the tall grass. It was not an uncomfortable silence, but she kept wondering why he had made the offer. A man with his own place could have ignored her and gone on with his day. The house came into view after they rounded a bend. It was small and square, built from weathered gray boards that had seen years of prairie wind. A low porch stretched across the front. A stack of split cordwood was piled neatly against the side, and beside it stood a smaller shed with a slanted roof. No other buildings in sight. No neighbors close enough to hear a raised voice. Kyla noticed that. "Been here long?" she asked, her voice careful. "Going on 4 years," he said, stepping up onto the porch. "Wasn't much when I bought it. Fixed it up between hauls." He opened the door and held it for her. "A man needs a place to come back to." Inside, the air was cooler. The scent of pine soap and strong coffee hung in the room. A plain wood table sat near the window. A cook stove rested in the corner with a kettle on top. The floors were swept clean. There was no clutter, just the kind of order that came from one person living alone. The man set the oats down and motioned toward a short hallway. "Room's back here." She followed him to a narrow space at the rear of the house. A small bed sat under a single window. A folded quilt lay at the foot. A washstand with a basin and pitcher stood against the wall, and on the inside of the door there was a bolt, clean, oiled, easy to slide. "You can lock it from in here," he said, tapping the bolt once. "No one comes around. Nearest place is a mile off." Kyla stepped inside fully, her hand brushing the smooth wood of the door frame. She had not had a door she could lock since she left her people. For a moment she did not trust her voice, so she just nodded. The man stood in the hall, not crowding her. "I'm gone most mornings with the freight teams. Back before sundown unless something keeps us. There's beans, flour, and coffee in the pantry. Water barrels out back. You'll see the pump." She looked at him, then trying to read him. "You sure about this?" "You don't know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "You needed a place. I had one." Her chest tightened. She was not used to someone stating it that plainly without weighing what they might get in return. "Name's Daniel," he added. "Daniel Reed." "Kyla," she said quietly. He nodded once, then stepped back toward the kitchen. "You eat yet?" She shook her head. "Stew's on the stove. There's enough for 2. That evening they ate at the table with the lamp casting a soft circle of light between them. Daniel did not push her to talk. When she did speak, she told him only what was safe, that she had been walking for a long time, that she had no family left, that she was looking for work. She did not tell him about the soldiers, about the camp, about the night she killed a man to escape. Daniel listened without interrupting. His gaze was steady, and it made her uneasy at first. But slowly, as the meal went on, it began to calm her. After the dishes were washed and set to dry, he showed her again how the bolt worked. She slid it into place once feeling the weight of it, then opened it again. He gave a short nod and stepped away, leaving her to close the door. Alone in the small room, Kyla sat on the bed. Her hands rested on her knees. For the first time in weeks she felt the strain in her back begin to ease. She was not sure how long she would stay, not sure if the offer was truly without conditions. But for tonight she had walls, a door, a lock. That was enough. She lay down on the bed without undressing, staring up at the ceiling. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of Daniel moving in the other room. She heard him banking the fire, heard his boots cross the floor, heard the creak of his bedroom door closing, and then silence. Kyla closed her eyes, but sleep did not come easily. It never did anymore. Every time she started to drift, she saw fire, heard screams, felt the rough hands of soldiers pulling her from the ground. She opened her eyes again and stared into the dark. Hours passed. The house settled around her. The night air cooled. And still she could not sleep. Finally she rose from the bed and moved quietly to the door. She unlocked the bolt, stepped into the hallway, and listened. Daniel's room was silent. She moved past it toward the main room, intending only to sit by the window for a while. But something stopped her. A faint line of light beneath his door. She hesitated, then heard it. A low sound, ragged, uneven, breathing. No, not breathing, crying. Kyla stood frozen in the hallway, her hand pressed against the wall. She had not expected this, had not expected him to be anything other than what he seemed, steady, calm, unbothered. But the sound coming from his room was the sound of a man breaking. She almost turned away, almost went back to her own room and pretended she had not heard, but then he spoke, his voice muffled and thick with grief. "I couldn't save them. God help me, I couldn't save the children." Kyla's breath caught in her throat. She knew that voice, not his voice, but the weight in it, the guilt, the kind that never left. She had heard it in her own voice every night since she escaped. She stood there in the dark hallway listening to a stranger's pain and felt something crack open inside her chest. She did not know who Daniel Reed was, did not know what he had done or what he carried, but she knew in that moment that he was haunted, just like her. The next morning, Kyla woke to the sound of boots crossing the porch. She lay still, listening to the faint scrape of metal as Daniel worked the stove. The smell of coffee reached her through the open door of her room. She dressed slowly, pulling on the same worn dress, the same two small boots. Her body ached from weeks of walking, but it was a dull ache now, familiar. When she stepped into the kitchen, Daniel was pouring coffee into 2 tin mugs. He glanced at her once, not startled to see her, just acknowledging. "Morning," he said. "Morning." She answered, her voice low from sleep. He nodded toward the table. "Sit. Bread's fresh." They ate in quiet. She watched him between sips of coffee. His movements were deliberate, not slow, but measured. His face showed no sign of the grief she had heard last night. No redness around his eyes, no tremble in his hands. But she knew it was there, beneath the surface, buried deep. He told her he would be hauling feed and fence posts to a ranch south of town, that he would not be back until sundown. "If you need anything," he said, "Mercantile's got a line of credit for me. Just tell them you're staying here." Kyla hesitated. "You're trusting me with that." He met her eyes. "If I didn't, you wouldn't be here." When he left, the house felt too still. She spent the morning wiping down the table, sweeping the floors, going through the pantry. The beans, flour, and jerky were enough to keep her fed. She decided she would make something decent for supper. It had been too long since she had cooked in a real kitchen. But as she worked, her mind kept drifting back to the sound of his voice in the night. I couldn't save them. Who were they? What had he done? And why did it matter to her? That evening she made beans with a bit of the salted pork she found wrapped in paper. She set the table, lit the lamp, and waited. When Daniel came through the door, dust in his hair and sweat darkening his shirt, he paused at the threshold. His eyes moved to the table, to the food, to her. "This is good," he said quietly. They ate in silence again, but this time the silence felt heavier. After the dishes were washed, Kyla stood by the window looking out at the darkening prairie. She felt Daniel's presence behind her, steady and unhurried. "You didn't sleep last night," she said without turning around. He did not answer right away. "No," he said finally. "Bad dreams. Something like that." She turned to face him then. His expression had not changed, but his eyes had. They were darker now, tired. "I heard you," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "I figured you might." Kyla crossed the room slowly, stopping a few feet away from him. She did not know why she was doing this, did not know what she hoped to find, but she needed to know. "Who were they?" she asked. The ones you couldn't save. Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked away toward the stove, toward the window, anywhere but at her. Children, he said finally. Apache children. The word hit her like a fist. Apache. Her breath stopped. Her heart slammed hard against her ribs. He did not know. Could not know. She had hidden it so carefully. The way she spoke, the way she dressed, the way she kept her head down and her past buried. But now, standing in this small kitchen with this man who had given her shelter, she felt the weight of it pressing down on her chest. Daniel kept talking, his voice low and strained. I was a soldier, years ago, before I left the service. We were sent to clear out a camp near Slim Buttes. Kyla's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Slim Buttes. She knew that name. Everyone did. It was a massacre, a slaughter. I tried to stop it, Daniel continued. Tried to pull some of them out before the fires spread. I got 2 kids out, a boy and a girl. But their mother... He stopped, swallowed hard. I couldn't reach her in time. And then one of the officers... He shot the kids anyway. Said they'd grow up to be a threat. His voice broke on the last word. Kyla stood frozen. Her mind was spinning. Her chest was tight. This man, this kind, quiet man who had offered her shelter without asking for anything in return. He had been there. He had been part of it. She did not know what to say, did not know what to feel. Rage, grief, fear, all of it tangled together in her throat. Daniel looked at her, then his eyes red-rimmed but steady. I left the service after that. Couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't be part of it. I've been trying to, I don't know, make up for it, I guess, even though I know I can't. Kyla's voice came out flat, cold. You can't. He nodded. I know. She turned away from him, her hands shaking. She wanted to leave, wanted to walk out that door and never look back, but she had nowhere to go, and somewhere deep in the back of her mind a voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. That night, Kyla lay in her bed staring at the ceiling. She did not sleep, could not sleep. When the house finally settled into silence, she rose and moved quietly down the hallway. She stopped at Daniel's door, and beneath it, faint but unmistakable, she saw the edge of something, a wooden box, old, dusty. She knelt down and pulled it toward her, her hands trembling. Inside was a military badge, a folded letter, and at the bottom, stained with something dark and old, a piece of cloth, Apache cloth. Her breath hitched. She unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. Forgive me for what I did at Slim Buttes. I cannot forgive myself. It was signed, Daniel Reed. Kyla sat back on her heels, the letter clutched in her hands. He had been there. He had been part of the horror that destroyed her people, and now she was living in his house. Morning came too soon. Kyla had not slept. She had sat on the floor of the hallway for hours, the letter in her hands, the military badge cold against her palm. When the first light began to creep through the windows, she had carefully placed everything back in the box and slid it beneath Daniel's door. Then she had gone to her room, closed the door, and waited. She heard him rise, heard the creak of floorboards as he moved through the house, heard the stove being lit, the coffee being poured. The same sounds as yesterday, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Kyla dressed slowly, her fingers clumsy on the buttons of her dress. Her mind kept circling back to the letter, to the words written in desperate, shaking hand. Forgive me. She did not know if she could. When she finally stepped into the kitchen, Daniel was standing by the stove, his back to her. He did not turn around immediately, just stood there still as stone. Coffee's ready, he said quietly. His voice carried no expectation, no demand, just the simple offer. Kyla moved to the table and sat down. Daniel poured her a cup, set it in front of her, then took his seat across from her. The silence between them was thick and heavy, different from before. He knew she had found the box. She could see it in the way he held himself, tense, waiting. Finally he spoke. You went into my room. It was not a question, Not an accusation, just a statement of fact. "I did," Kyla said. Daniel nodded slowly. He wrapped his hands around his own cup, but did not drink. "Then you know." "I know you were a soldier. I know you were at Slim Butte's." Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. She pressed them flat against the table to still them. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "I need you to understand something," he said. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. What I did, what I was part of, there's no making that right." "Then why tell me?" Kyla asked. "Why keep that letter? Why stay here alone trying to help people you don't even know?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Because if I don't try, then I'm still the man who stood by and let it happen. I can't bring those children back. Can't undo what was done. But if I can give someone like you a place to stand, maybe when I die, I'll know I tried." Kyla stared at him. She wanted to be angry, wanted to hate him, but all she felt was a deep, aching sadness, because she understood. She understood what it meant to carry blood on your hands, to wake up every night and see the faces of the dead, to know that no matter how far you ran, you could never outrun what you had done. "I killed a man," she said suddenly. Daniel looked up, surprise flickering across his face. 6 months ago. A soldier. He was guarding me at Fort Robinson." The words came out flat, clinical, as if she were talking about someone else. "They kept me there like an animal, like something to study, because of my height, because I was Apache. They wanted to know why I was so tall, wanted to measure me, document me." Her voice cracked on the last word. "One night I got loose from the restraints. The guard came in to check on me. I didn't think. I just moved, grabbed his head and twisted until I heard it snap." She looked down at her hands. They were shaking now, trembling against the wood. "Then I ran, and I kept running, until I came here." The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel did not move, did not speak. He just sat there watching her with those steady gray-blue eyes. Finally he leaned forward, his voice low and gentle. "Did he hurt you?" "The guard." Kyla's throat tightened. "Does it matter?" "Yes," Daniel said simply. "It matters." She looked at him, then really looked at him and saw something she had not expected. Understanding, not pity, not judgment, just the quiet recognition of one broken person looking at another. "He tried," she said finally. "More than once. That last night he came in drunk, said no one would care what happened to a savage." Daniel's hands clenched into fists on the table. "Then you did what you had to do to survive." "So did you," Kyla said. "At Slim Butte's. You were following orders. You were a soldier." "No," Daniel said sharply. "Don't do that. Don't make excuses for me. I had a choice. I could have said no, could have walked away, but I didn't. I stood there and watched it happen." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "And when I finally did try to help, it was too late. I saved 2 children only to watch them die anyway. That's not the same as what you did." Kyla shook her head. "Isn't it? We're both killers. We both carry blood we can't wash off." Daniel was silent for a long moment. Then he reached across the table, slow and careful, and placed his hand over hers. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but we're still here, still trying. That has to count for something." Kyla looked down at his hand covering hers. It was warm, rough, steady. For the first time since she had escaped Fort Robinson, she did not feel completely alone. The rest of that day passed in a strange, quiet rhythm. Daniel left for work as usual, and Kyla spent the morning tending to the house. But her mind was not on the chores. It was on the conversation they had shared, on the weight that had lifted just slightly from her chest. She understood now why Daniel had offered her shelter, why he had asked for nothing in return. He was trying to save someone, anyone, because he could not save the ones who mattered most. In the afternoon, Kyla decided to walk into town. She needed to see the place in daylight, needed to know if it was safe. Pine Creek was small, A single dirt street lined with wooden buildings. A mercantile, a saloon, a church at the far end, a few homes scattered beyond the main road, and at the edge of town a small house with a sign that read, Martha Brennan Midwife. Kyla had heard the name before. Daniel had mentioned her once, said she was the only person in town who would treat anyone regardless of who they were or where they came from. Kyla stood outside the house for a long moment, debating whether to knock. Finally she raised her hand and rapped twice on the door. It opened almost immediately. A woman in her late 50s stood in the doorway. She was short, gray-haired, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked Kyla up and down once, then stepped aside. "Come in," she said simply. Kyla hesitated, then stepped inside. The house was small but tidy. Shelves lined the walls filled with jars of herbs, bandages, and medical instruments. A table sat in the center of the room covered with a clean white cloth. Martha closed the door and turned to face her. "You're the one staying with Daniel Reed?" It was not a question. "I am," Kyla said. Martha nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Kyla's face. "You're Apache." Kyla's breath caught. She had been so careful, so cautious. How did this woman know Martha must have seen the panic in her eyes because she held up a hand? "Don't worry, I'm not going to tell anyone, but I've seen enough to know, the way you move, the way you hold yourself, and those scars on your wrists." Kyla looked down at her hands. The scars were faint, but they were there. Thin white lines where the restraints had cut into her skin night after night. "How do you know?" Kyla asked quietly. Martha sighed and moved to the table, gesturing for Kyla to sit. "Because I used to work at Fort Robinson, as a nurse. I saw what they did to people like you, saw how they treated prisoners, how they treated the tribes." Her voice was bitter. "I couldn't stand it anymore, so I left, came here, started helping people the way I should have helped them back then." Kyla sat down slowly, her mind racing. "You worked at Fort Robinson?" "For 3 years," Martha said. "Hated every minute of it. But I stayed because I thought I could make a difference, thought I could help." She shook her head. "I was a fool." Kyla leaned forward. "Do you remember a woman tall, Apache, kept in the medical wing?" Martha's eyes widened slightly. "That was you." Kyla nodded. Martha sat down heavily in the chair across from her. "I remember. They brought you in 6 months ago, said you were a curiosity, something to study. I tried to make them treat you like a person, but they wouldn't listen." Her voice dropped. "I heard you escaped, heard you killed a guard on your way out." Kyla's hands clenched in her lap. "He deserved it." "I know," Martha said quietly. "I know what he did, what he tried to do." She reached across the table and placed her hand over Kyla's. "I'm glad you got out, and I'm glad you're here." Kyla felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back, but one escaped sliding down her cheek. "Why are you telling me this?" Martha squeezed her hand gently. "Because you need to know you're not alone, and because if anyone comes looking for you, I'll make sure they don't find you." Kyla stared at her. "Why would you do that?" Martha smiled, sad and tired. "Because I couldn't help you then, but I can help you now." Kyla walked back to Daniel's house in a daze. Her mind was spinning with everything Martha had told her. The woman had been there, had seen what happened, had known, and she was willing to protect her. When she reached the house, Daniel was already home. He was sitting on the porch whittling a piece of wood. He looked up as she approached. "You all right?" he asked. Kyla nodded and sat down beside him. "I met Martha." Daniel's hands stilled. "She told you?" "She told me she worked at Fort Robinson, that she knows who I am." Daniel set the knife and wood aside. "Martha's a good woman. If she says she'll keep your secret, she will." Kyla looked at him. You knew she worked there." "I suspected," Daniel said. "She never talks about her past, but I've seen the way she looks at soldiers when they come through town. The way she tenses up." He paused. "I figured she'd seen things she couldn't forget." Kyla nodded slowly. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun sink lower on the horizon. The air was cooling, and the first stars were beginning to appear. Finally, Kyla spoke. "I don't know if I can stay here." Daniel looked at her. "Why not?" "Because you were part of it. Because every time I look at you I see what happened to my people, and I don't know if I can live with that." Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand. And if you need to go, I won't stop you. But I want you to know something." He turned to face her fully. "I can't change what I did. Can't undo it. But I can make sure you have a safe place for as long as you need it. No conditions, no expectations, just a place to stand." Kyla looked at him, at the honesty in his eyes, and felt something shift inside her. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care so much?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because I couldn't save them. But maybe I can save you." That night Kyla lay in her bed staring at the ceiling. She thought about everything that had happened, about Daniel's confession, about Martha's kindness, about the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. And for the first time since she had escaped Fort Robinson, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe she could stay here. Maybe she could build something new. Maybe she could find a way to live with the ghosts that haunted her. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her. But in the next room, Daniel lay awake, tormented by dreams of fire and screaming children, and neither of them knew that their fragile peace was about to be shattered. 3 days later, a man rode into Pine Creek. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a hard face and cold eyes. He wore a badge on his chest and a gun on his hip. His name was Marshal Dalton Cross, and he was looking for someone, an escaped prisoner, an Apache woman, abnormally tall, armed and dangerous. He stopped at the mercantile, first asking questions, then the saloon, then the boarding house. No one had seen her, but Dalton was patient. He had tracked fugitives across half the territory. He knew how to wait, how to watch, how to listen. And he knew she was here. He could feel it. That evening he knocked on Daniel Reed's door. Daniel opened it, his face calm, but his eyes wary. "Help you?" he asked. Dalton smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "I'm looking for someone. An escaped prisoner from Fort Robinson. Apache woman, very tall. You seen anyone like that around here?" Daniel's expression did not change. "No, can't say I have." Dalton studied him for a moment. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." Dalton nodded slowly. "Well, if you do see her, you let me know. There's a reward for information leading to her capture." He tipped his hat and turned to leave. But before he stepped off the porch, he paused and looked back. "One more thing. You living here alone?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's my business." Dalton smiled again. "Just asking." He walked away, but Daniel could feel his eyes on the house long after he disappeared down the road. Inside, Kyla stood pressed against the wall, her heart pounding. She had heard every word, and she knew. It was only a matter of time before Dalton came back. The night after Marshal Dalton's visit, neither of them slept. Kyla sat on her bed fully dressed, her boots laced tight. She had packed the few things she owned into a small bundle, a change of clothes, the coins Daniel had given her for helping around the house, a piece of dried meat wrapped in cloth. She was ready to run. She had been ready to run since the moment she heard Dalton's voice on the porch, since she saw the coldness in his eyes through the gap in the curtains, since she understood that he would not stop looking until he found her. In the main room, Daniel sat at the table, a lamp burning low beside him. His rifle lay across his lap. He had not moved in hours, just sat there watching the door, waiting for footsteps that might come at any moment. The house was silent except for the wind moving through the cottonwoods outside. Finally, as the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the windows, Daniel rose and walked to Kyla's door. He knocked softly. "It's me." Kyla opened the door. She stood there with her bundle in her hands, her eyes tired but alert. Daniel looked at the bundle, then at her face. "You planning to leave?" "I have to," she said quietly. "He knows I'm here. Or he suspects. Either way, it's only a matter of time before he comes back with more men. Daniel shook his head. If you run now, he'll know for sure. He'll track you. And out there alone, you won't stand a chance. I've been alone before. I know, Daniel said. But you don't have to be anymore. Kyla looked at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt or hesitation. But all she saw was determination. What are you suggesting? Daniel took a breath. We make it real, you and me. We tell everyone you're my wife, that you've been here for months, that Dalton's looking for the wrong person. Kyla stared at him. He won't believe that. He might, if we're convincing enough, if the town backs us up. Why would the town do that? Daniel's jaw tightened. Because Martha will make them. She has influence here. People trust her. And if she says you've been here all along, they'll believe her. Kyla set the bundle down slowly. You're asking me to lie, to put you at risk. I'm asking you to stay, Daniel said simply. And I'm willing to take the risk. Kyla turned away from him, her hands gripping the edge of the small table in her room. You don't understand what you're offering. If he finds out, if he proves I'm the one he's looking for, they'll arrest you too. For harboring a fugitive, for lying to a federal marshal. I understand, Daniel said. Do you... Kyla turned back to face him, her voice rising. Do you understand that I killed a man, that I'm wanted for murder, that being associated with me could destroy everything you've built here? Daniel stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. I understand that you did what you had to do to survive, and I understand that I'm not going to let them take you back to that place. His voice was steady, unwavering. I've spent years trying to make up for what I did, for the lives I couldn't save. Maybe I can't fix the past, but I can do this. I can help you, and I'm going to. Kyla felt something crack inside her chest, a wall she had built so carefully, so deliberately, beginning to crumble. Why? She whispered. Why do you care so much? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. Because when I look at you, I see them, the children I couldn't save, the people I failed, and I know I can't bring them back. But maybe if I can help you, if I can give you a chance to live, then maybe their deaths weren't completely meaningless. Kyla closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. You can't save me, Daniel. I'm not your redemption. I know, he said softly. But you're here, and you're alive, and that's enough. They stood there in the dim light of dawn, two broken people holding on to the only hope they had left. Finally, Kyla nodded. All right, we'll try it your way. That morning, Daniel rode into town to speak with Martha. Kyla stayed at the house, pacing the floor, her mind racing with all the ways this plan could fall apart. But when Daniel returned an hour later, he was not alone. Martha sat beside him on the wagon, her face set with determination. She climbed down and walked straight to Kyla, taking both her hands in hers. Daniel told me everything, she said, and I'm going to help. Kyla swallowed hard. You don't have to do this. If Dalton finds out you're lying, you could lose everything. Martha's grip tightened. I've already lost everything that mattered. My conscience, my peace of mind. But I can get some of it back by doing the right thing now. She looked Kyla straight in the eyes. I should have helped you when you were at Fort Robinson. I should have done more. This is my chance to make up for that. Kyla felt tears prick at her eyes again. Thank you, she whispered. Martha squeezed her hands once, then turned to Daniel. We need to move fast. Dalton will be back soon, probably today. We need to make sure the story is straight. Over the next few hours, they went over every detail. Martha would tell anyone who asked that she had treated Kyla for a fever 2 months ago, that she had been staying with Daniel since early summer, that the town had seen her around, though she kept mostly to herself because of her height. Daniel would say they had married quietly without fanfare because Kyla was shy and did not like attention. It was a simple story, but it would only work if everyone believed it, and if Dalton did not look too closely. That afternoon, just as Martha had predicted, Dalton returned. This time he brought 2 other men with him, deputies by the look of them, hard-faced and armed. They rode up to Daniel's house and dismounted. Dalton knocked on the door louder this time, more insistent. Daniel opened it, his face calm. "Marshal?" "Mr. Reed," Dalton said. "Mind if we come in?" "Depends. What's this about?" Dalton smiled, but his eyes were cold. "Just want to ask a few questions. Won't take long." Daniel stepped aside, letting them enter. Kyla was sitting at the table, a cup of coffee in her hands. She had changed into a cleaner dress, one that Martha had brought from her own collection. Her hair was pulled back and she looked as calm as she could manage, but inside her heart was racing. Dalton's eyes went to her immediately. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her height, her features, the scars on her wrists that she had tried to cover with long sleeves. "This your wife?" he asked Daniel. "She is," Daniel said evenly. Dalton walked closer to the table, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "What's your name, ma'am?" Kyla looked up at him, her expression neutral. "Kyla Reed. That's an unusual name." "It's Apache," she said simply. Dalton's eyebrows rose. "Apache? You're Apache what half?" Kyla said. "My mother was Apache. My father was a trader." It was a lie, but it was close enough to the truth that she could say it without hesitation. Dalton circled the table slowly, like a predator sizing up prey. "When did you 2 get married?" "Early July," Daniel said. "About 6 weeks ago." "And where were you before that, Mrs. Reed?" Kyla met his eyes steadily. "I was working as a laundress in a settlement near the Black Hills. The work dried up, so I came here looking for something new." "And you just happened to meet Mr. Reed?" "I did." Dalton stopped circling and leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. "You know, it's funny. I'm looking for a woman who fits your description almost perfectly. Tall, Apache, and she escaped from Fort Robinson about 6 months ago." Kyla's hands tightened around the coffee cup, but her face did not change. "I've never been to Fort Robinson." "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." Dalton pushed off the wall and walked to the door. He opened it and gestured to one of his deputies. "Bring the witness." Kyla's stomach dropped. A moment later a man stepped into the house. He was young, maybe 25, with a thin face and nervous eyes. He wore a military uniform. He was a soldier from Fort Robinson. Dalton gestured to Kyla. "This her." The soldier looked at Kyla, his eyes narrowing. He studied her face, her height, the way she held herself. Kyla forced herself to breathe slowly, to stay calm. Finally the soldier shook his head. "I don't think so. The woman I saw had shorter hair, and she had a tattoo on her shoulder, some kind of symbol." Dalton's jaw tightened. "You sure?" "Pretty sure. I mean, she's tall, but the face doesn't match." Kyla's tattoo was hidden beneath the long sleeves of her dress. The symbol of her clan inked into her skin when she was 15. If she had been wearing her old clothes, the soldier would have seen it, would have recognized her. But Martha had made sure she was dressed differently, had covered every mark that might give her away. Dalton stared at the soldier for a long moment, then turned back to Kyla. "Mind if I see your shoulder, ma'am?" Daniel stepped forward. "That's enough, Marshal. My wife doesn't have to prove anything to you. You've asked your questions. The soldier says it's not her. You've got no reason to stay." Dalton's eyes flicked to Daniel, then back to Kyla. "I'm just being thorough." "You're being intrusive," Daniel said, his voice hard. "And unless you've got a warrant, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Dalton held Daniel's gaze for a long, tense moment. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, we'll go. For now." He walked to the door, his deputies following. But before he stepped outside, he turned back one last time. "If I find out you're lying to me, Mr. Reed, I'll come back. And next time I won't be so polite." The door closed behind him. Kyla and Daniel stood frozen, listening to the sound of horses riding away. When the sound finally faded, Kyla let out a shaky breath. "That was too close." Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. "But we got through it." Kyla looked down at her hands. They were trembling. "He's not done. He'll come back." And next time he might bring someone who actually recognizes me. Daniel moved to the window watching the road. Then we need to be ready. That night after the house had settled into silence, Kyla could not sleep. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the confrontation with Dalton. Every word, every look. She knew they had been lucky. The soldier had not recognized her, but luck would not hold forever. She rose from the bed and walked quietly to the main room. Daniel was sitting at the table again, the lamp burning low. He looked up as she entered. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. She shook her head and sat down across from him. They were silent for a while, just sitting in the dim light. Finally Daniel spoke. "I need to tell you something. About Slim Buttes." Kyla looked at him. "You don't have to." "I do," he said. "You need to know the whole truth." He took a breath, his hands clasped on the table. "It was autumn, 1876. We were sent to clear out a village. The orders were to remove the tribe by any means necessary. I was young, 29. I'd been in the army for 3 years. His voice was steady, but Kyla could hear the pain beneath it. When we got there, the village was quiet, peaceful. There were women cooking, children playing, old men sitting by the fires. He paused, his jaw working. Our commander gave the order to burn the lodges, to force everyone out. I thought he meant we'd round them up, move them to a reservation, but that's not what happened. Kyla's hands clenched in her lap. They started shooting. Anyone who ran, anyone who resisted. I tried to stop it, tried to pull people out of the burning lodges. I got to one woman and 2 children, a boy and a girl, maybe 6 and 8 years old. His voice broke. I dragged them out of the smoke, told them to run, to hide. But before they could get away, one of the officers saw them. He said they were enemy combatants, said they'd grow up to be warriors, and he shot them, both of them, right in front of me. Kyla felt tears streaming down her face. I tried to stop him. Daniel continued, his voice barely a whisper. I hit him, knocked him down. But it was too late. The children were already dead, and the woman, their mother, she burned in the fire. I couldn't save her. He looked up at Kyla, his eyes red and filled with anguish. I was court-martialed for striking an officer, but they let me go because they said I was suffering from battle fatigue. They gave me an honorable discharge and told me to go home. He laughed bitterly. Honorable. There was nothing honorable about what I did. I should have done more, should have refused the orders, should have stood between those children and that gun. Kyla reached across the table and took his hand. You tried, she said softly. You tried to save them. That's more than most soldiers would have done. Daniel shook his head. It wasn't enough. It never is, Kyla said. But it's something. They sat there in the lamplight, holding hands across the table. 2 people carrying impossible weights. 2 people trying to find a way to live with what they had done and what had been done to them. Finally, Kyla spoke. You already know what I did at Fort Robinson, what I had to do to escape. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and walked around the table. He pulled Kyla to her feet and wrapped his arms around her. And I told you then, you did what you had to do to survive. That hasn't changed. It never will. She stiffened for a moment, then let herself lean into him. We're both carrying things we can't put down, he said quietly. But maybe we can carry them together, make them a little lighter. Kyla closed her eyes, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. Together, she whispered. They stood there holding each other in the darkness, 2 broken souls finding strength in their shared pain. And outside, hidden in the shadows beyond the house, Marshal Dalton Cross sat on his horse watching the lamplight flicker in the window. He had not left town. He had been waiting, watching. And now he had seen enough. He turned his horse and rode back toward Pine Creek, a grim smile on his face. He knew the truth now, and tomorrow he would prove it. Morning came with a knock on the door. Daniel was already awake, dressed and armed. He had not slept after their conversation, had spent the night sitting by the window watching the road, waiting for what he knew was coming. When the knock came sharp and insistent, he was not surprised. Kyla emerged from her room, her face pale but composed. She had dressed carefully, pulling her hair back, covering every inch of skin that might show a scar or mark. Daniel looked at her, once a silent question in his eyes. She nodded. He opened the door. Marshal Dalton stood on the porch, flanked by his 2 deputies. Behind them 3 more men on horseback, all armed, all watching the house with cold, suspicious eyes. "Mr. Reed," Dalton said, "we need to talk." "We talked yesterday," Daniel replied evenly. "That was before I spent the night doing some investigating." Dalton pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Got a wire from Fort Robinson this morning. They confirmed that the escaped prisoner had distinctive markings. A tribal tattoo on her left shoulder. Apache clan symbol." He looked past Daniel to where Kyla stood. "I'd like to see your wife's shoulder, Mr. Reed, just to clear this matter up once and for all." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I already told you. My wife doesn't have to prove anything to you." "Then you won't mind if I get a warrant," Dalton said. "I can have one here by tomorrow, and when I come back with it, I'll search this entire house. I'll check every inch of your wife's body for marks. And if I find that tattoo, I'll arrest both of you. Her for murder, you for harboring a fugitive and lying to a federal officer." He leaned closer. "Or you can make this easy. Let me see her shoulder right now. If there's no tattoo, I'll apologize and leave. You have my word." Daniel stared at him, his mind racing. He knew Kyla had the tattoo, knew that showing it would mean her arrest, her death. But if Dalton came back with a warrant, they would have no choice, no way out. Before Daniel could respond, a voice called out from behind Dalton, "That won't be necessary, Marshal." Everyone turned. Martha Brennan was walking up the road, her medical bag in hand. Behind her a small crowd had gathered. The mercantile owner, the blacksmith, 2 women from the church, the saloon keeper. People Kyla had never spoken to. People who had stared at her with suspicion and fear just days ago. Now they stood together, a wall of bodies between Dalton and the house. Martha walked right up to the marshal, her chin raised. "Mrs. Reed is my patient. Has been since she arrived in Pine Creek 2 months ago. I treated her for fever and exhaustion, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that she does not have any tribal tattoos." Dalton's eyes narrowed. "You're sure about that?" "I examined her myself," Martha said firmly. "When someone has a fever, you check their entire body for signs of infection. I saw her shoulders, her back, her arms. No tattoos." The mercantile owner stepped forward. "I can confirm Mrs. Reed has been here since early summer. She bought fabric from my store in July. Paid with Mr. Reed's credit." The blacksmith nodded. "Seen her around town a few times myself. Quiet woman, keeps to herself. But she's been here." One of the church women spoke up, her voice firm. "She attended Sunday service 3 weeks ago, sat in the back pew. I remember because of her height. Hard to miss someone that tall." Kyla blinked. She had never been to church in Pine Creek, had never spoken to most of these people. They were lying for her. Dalton looked around at the gathered townspeople, his face darkening. "You're all willing to swear to this?" "We are," Martha said. "And if you want to accuse all of us of lying, you're welcome to try. But I think your superiors might wonder why an entire town would conspire to protect one woman." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "Unless there's something else going on here, unless maybe you're so desperate to close this case that you're willing to harass innocent people." Dalton's hand moved toward his gun, but he stopped himself. He looked at Daniel, then at Kyla, then back at the crowd. Finally, he folded the paper and put it back in his coat. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Yes, it is," Martha replied. "Unless you have actual evidence, which you don't." Dalton stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to his men. "Let's go." They mounted their horses and rode away, leaving a trail of dust in their wake. The crowd waited until they were out of sight before beginning to disperse. As they left, several of them nodded to Daniel. A few even smiled at Kyla. Martha was the last to leave. She walked up to the porch and looked at Kyla. "You're safe now, for a while at least." Kyla's voice was thick with emotion. "Why did you do that? Why did they do that?" Martha smiled softly. Because I told them the truth. Not about who you are or where you came from, but about what you deserve, a chance, a life. And they agreed. She squeezed Kyla's hand once, then walked away. Daniel and Kyla stood on the porch watching her go. "I don't understand," Kyla whispered. "They don't even know me." "They know enough," Daniel said. "They know you're someone worth protecting." That afternoon, Daniel rode into town alone. He needed to thank the people who had stood up for Kyla, needed to make sure they understood what they had risked. But when he arrived at the mercantile, the owner waved him off. "Don't thank me. Thank Martha. She's the one who convinced us." "How did she do that?" The man shrugged. "She told us your wife was a good woman who had been through hard times, said the marshal was harassing her because of her height and her heritage, said it wasn't right." He paused. "And she reminded us that any of us could be in the same position someday. Falsely accused. Hunted for something we didn't do. She asked if we'd want someone to stand up for us." Daniel nodded slowly. "Well, I'm grateful. We both are." "Just take care of her," the man said, "and keep her safe." When Daniel returned to the house, he found Kyla sitting at the table staring at nothing. "You all right?" he asked. She looked up at him, her eyes distant. "I've spent my whole life being told I was too big, too different, too much. And today a town full of strangers lied to protect me." Her voice broke. "I don't know what to do with that." Daniel sat down beside her. "You accept it. You let yourself believe that maybe, just maybe, you deserve it." Kyla shook her head. "But I don't. I killed a man, Daniel. I'm exactly what Dalton says I am. A murderer. A fugitive." "You're a survivor," Daniel said firmly. "There's a difference." They sat in silence for a while. Finally Daniel spoke again. "We should make it real." Kyla looked at him. "What?" "The marriage. We should make it real. Not just for show, not just to fool Dalton, but because I want to." Kyla stared at him, her heart pounding. "Daniel, you don't have to do this. You've already done so much." "I'm not doing this out of obligation," he said. "I'm doing it because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for, someone worth standing beside." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I know we haven't known each other long. I know this isn't a normal courtship. But nothing about our lives is normal. And I'd rather face whatever comes next with you than face it alone." Kyla felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I don't know how to be a wife. I don't know how to be part of a family. My people are gone. My life before this is gone." "Then we'll build a new one," Daniel said. "Together." Kyla looked at him for a long moment. At the honesty in his eyes, at the strength in his hands, at the scars on his soul that matched her own. And she nodded. "All right. Yes." They were married the next day, not in the church as Daniel had suggested. Kyla could not bring herself to stand in front of the congregation that had lied for her, pretending to be something she was not. Instead, they rode out to a clearing near the cottonwoods where the prairie stretched wide and the sky was endless. Martha came with them, and the mercantile owner and the blacksmith. Just a small group of witnesses. The preacher was an old man who asked no questions. He read the vows from a worn Bible, his voice steady and sure. Daniel spoke his promises clearly. To love, to honor, to protect. When it was Kyla's turn, her voice shook. "I promise to stand beside you, to face whatever comes, to not run even when I'm afraid." It was the most she could offer, the most she could give. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife. Daniel leaned down and kissed her gentle and sure. It was the first time their lips had touched, the first time Kyla had let herself be that vulnerable with anyone. When they pulled apart, Martha was smiling through tears. "You're going to be all right," she said. "Both of you." That night back at the house, Kyla and Daniel sat at the table, the marriage certificate between them. "This is real now," Kyla said quietly. "It is," Daniel agreed. "What happens next?" Daniel reached across and took her hand. "We live. We build a life. We take it one day at a time." Kyla nodded, but her mind was spinning. She had never imagined this, had never thought she would have a home, a husband, a future. Later, as she prepared for bed, she caught sight of herself in the small mirror. The ring on her finger gleamed in the lamplight, a simple gold band, nothing fancy, but it was hers. She touched it gently, still not quite believing it was real. There was a soft knock on her door. "Come in," she said. Daniel stepped inside, his expression uncertain. "I wanted to say good night, and to tell you that nothing has to change. You still have your room, your space. I'm not expecting anything." Kyla looked at him for a long moment. Then she crossed the room and took his hand. "Stay," she said quietly. Daniel's eyes widened. "You sure?" "I'm sure." He followed her to the bed, and they sat together in the dim light. Neither of them spoke. There was no need for words. Kyla leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his body, the steadiness of his breathing, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe. They lay down together, fully clothed, just holding each other. No demands, no expectations, just the quiet comfort of not being alone. And as Kyla drifted toward sleep, she thought that maybe, just maybe, she could allow herself to hope. The next few weeks passed in a strange, quiet peace. Kyla and Daniel settled into a rhythm. He worked during the day, hauling freight and supplies. She tended the house, cooked meals, and slowly began to venture into town more often. The townspeople greeted her now, not with warmth exactly, but with a kind of respectful distance. They nodded when she passed, held doors for her, treated her like she belonged. It was more than she had ever expected. Martha visited, often bringing herbs and news from town. She taught Kyla how to prepare medicines, how to set a broken bone, how to stitch a wound. "You never know when you might need these skills," she said. Kyla suspected Martha was preparing her for something, for the possibility that they might need to help others the way Martha had helped her. One evening about a month after the wedding, Kyla realized something. She was late. At first she dismissed it. Stress could cause delays. The upheaval of the past few months had been more than enough to disrupt her body's rhythms. But as the days passed and her symptoms grew, she could no longer deny it. She was pregnant. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the calendar she had marked with faint pencil lines, counting and recounting. 6 weeks late, maybe 7. Her hand moved to her stomach, flat and unchanged for now. But she knew. Deep in her bones, she knew. She had been told all her life that her body was wrong, that she was too tall, too strange, too different to ever be a proper woman, that no man would want her. And if one did, her body would never give him children. But here she was, carrying life. She did not know how to feel. Fear, wonder, disbelief. All of it crashed over her in waves. That evening when Daniel came home, she was sitting at the table, her hands clasped tight. He knew immediately that something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked, crossing to her. Kyla looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm pregnant." Daniel froze. For a moment he just stared at her, as if the words had not quite registered. Then he sank into the chair beside her. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be. I've been counting. I'm late, and I feel different." Daniel's hand moved to cover hers. "How do you feel about it?" Kyla let out a shaky breath. "I don't know. Terrified. Amazed. I was told this could never happen." "Why?" "Because of my size. Because I'm different. The women in my tribe, they said my body wasn't made for bearing children, that I was built for other things." Her voice dropped. "I believed them." Daniel squeezed her hand. They were wrong. Kyla looked at him, searching his face. "Are you happy about this?" Daniel's eyes were bright, his voice rough with emotion. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. Kyla, this is a second chance, for both of us. A chance to create something good. Something that matters." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "We're going to be parents." Kyla buried her face in his shoulder, tears streaming down her face. She had not realized how much she needed to hear that. how much she needed to know that he wanted this too. That night they talked for hours about the future, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the child who would be born into a world that was harsh and unforgiving, but who would also know love, safety, a home. But beneath the hope there was fear, because Kyla knew that bringing a child into this world meant risking everything. If Dalton came back, if he found proof of who she really was, if he arrested her and took her back to Fort Robinson, her child would be born in a prison, or worse, would never be born at all. She did not share these fears with Daniel, not yet. She wanted to hold on to this moment of hope for just a little longer. But deep down she knew the peace they had found was fragile, and it would not last. 2 days later Martha came to the house. Her face was grave. "We need to talk," she said. Daniel and Kyla sat at the table while Martha paced the room. "I got word from a contact in Fort Robinson," she said finally. "Dalton didn't give up. He's been writing letters, asking questions, digging into your past, Daniel." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What did he find?" "He found your military records, your discharge papers, the court-martial." Martha looked at Kyla. "And he's starting to put pieces together. He knows you were at Slim Buttes. He knows the timeline. And he's wondering why a former soldier with a history of defending natives would suddenly have an Apache wife." Kyla felt her stomach drop. "He's going to come back." "Yes," Martha said. "And this time he'll have evidence. Not enough to prove you're the escaped prisoner, but enough to make your lives very difficult." Daniel stood, his hands clenched into fists. "What do we do?" Martha was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "There's a network," she said quietly. "People like me. People who help natives escape. People who believe what's being done to the tribes is wrong." She unfolded the paper. It was a map marked with small symbols. Safe houses, all across the territory. Places where people can hide, rest, disappear if they need to. She looked at Kyla. "If things get bad, if Dalton gets too close, you can use this. You can run, and we'll make sure you get somewhere safe." Kyla stared at the map, her mind reeling. "How long have you been doing this?" 10 years, Martha said, "since I left Fort Robinson. I've helped dozens of people, families, elders, children." Her voice hardened. "I couldn't save everyone, but I saved some, and that has to be enough." She folded the map and handed it to Kyla. "Keep this safe and pray you never have to use it." After Martha left, Kyla and Daniel sat in silence. Finally, Kyla spoke. "We can't run, not now, not with a baby coming." Daniel nodded. "Then we stay, and we fight." Kyla looked at him, at the determination in his eyes, and felt something shift inside her. She was not alone anymore. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Autumn came to Dakota Territory with a sudden chill that cut through the prairie wind. The cottonwoods turned gold, their leaves falling in slow spirals to the ground. The sky grew pale and distant, and frost appeared on the windows each morning. Kyla's body changed with the season. Her belly began to swell small at first, barely noticeable beneath her loose dresses. But by the time the leaves had fully fallen, there was no hiding it. She was unmistakably with child. Martha came to check on her once a week, bringing herbs for nausea and fatigue. She examined Kyla carefully, measuring the growth of her belly, listening to the baby's heartbeat with an ear pressed against Kyla's skin. "Strong," she said one afternoon, sitting back with a satisfied nod. "The baby's strong, and so are you." Kyla placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the small movements within. Flutters at first like wings beating against the inside of her skin, then stronger. Kicks, pushes, a person growing inside her. It still did not feel entirely real. "Have you thought about what happens after?" Martha asked quietly. Kyla looked up. After the baby is born. What you'll tell them. How you'll raise them." Kyla was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. I've been trying not to think that far ahead." Martha's expression softened. You're going to have to think about it eventually. This child will be caught between two worlds, Apache and white. They'll need to know both. Need to understand both. How? Kyla asked, her voice thick with emotion. How do I teach them about a people who are gone? A culture that's being destroyed? How do I give them something I barely have myself? Martha reached across and took Kyla's hand. You teach them what you remember. The stories, the songs, the language. You keep it alive in them, even if it's just fragments. She paused. And you make sure they know they're not alone, that there are others like them, others who carry the same blood, the same history. Kyla nodded, but the weight of it pressed down on her chest. She had been so focused on surviving, on escaping, on building a life here that she had not allowed herself to think about what came next, about what it would mean to bring a child into a world that had tried so hard to erase people like her. That night, as she and Daniel sat by the fire, she finally spoke the fear that had been growing inside her. What if I can't do this? Daniel looked up from the piece of wood he was whittling. Can't do what? Be a mother, raise a child. What if I don't know how? What if I fail them the way my people failed me? Daniel set the wood aside and moved to sit beside her. Your people didn't fail you. They were destroyed. There's a difference. Is there? Kyla's voice was sharp. They told me I was too big to ever be a real woman, too strange to ever belong. And I believed them. I let those words shape me. And now you're here, Daniel said firmly. Alive, married, carrying a child. You proved them wrong. Kyla shook her head. I don't feel like I proved anything. I feel like I'm barely holding on. Like any moment everything could fall apart. Daniel took her hand, his grip steady and sure. Then we hold on together. And we don't let go. Kyla looked at him, at the quiet strength in his eyes, and felt some of the fear ease. Not all of it, but enough. 3 weeks later, on a cold November morning, a visitor arrived. Kyla heard the horse before she saw it, the sound of hooves on frozen ground moving slowly up the road toward the house. She moved to the window, her heart already beginning to race. But it was not Dalton. It was an old man riding a paint horse that looked as weathered as its rider. He wore buckskin and fur, his long gray hair braided down his back. His face was lined and weathered, carved by years of sun and wind, and on his chest, barely visible beneath his coat, was a small beaded medallion. Apache. Kyla's breath caught. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch, her hand resting on her swollen belly. The man dismounted slowly, his movements stiff with age. He looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes taking in her height, her features, the curve of her stomach. Then he spoke, his voice rough but clear. Kyla Naki. Kyla's knees nearly buckled. He had spoken her full name, her true name, in the language of her people. How do you know me? She whispered. The old man stepped closer. I knew your mother. I knew your clan. I am Tahatan, Hawk, of the Mescalero band. Kyla's vision blurred with tears. I thought everyone was gone. Not everyone, Tahatan said. There are still a few of us, scattered, hidden, but alive. He looked past her to the house. May I come inside? Kyla nodded, unable to speak. She led him into the house and poured him coffee with shaking hands. They sat at the table, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Finally, Tahatan broke the silence. I have been looking for you for many months. I heard rumors of a tall Apache woman living among the whites. I had to see if it was true. How did you survive? Kyla asked. I thought our band was destroyed. It was, Tahatan said, his voice heavy. But I was not with them when the soldiers came. I was hunting in the hills. When I returned, there was nothing left but ash and bodies. He paused, his hands wrapped around the coffee cup. I searched for survivors, found a few. We scattered, went different directions. It was the only way to stay alive. Kyla's hand moved to her belly again, an unconscious gesture of protection. Why did you come here? Tahatan's eyes moved to her stomach. Because you carry the last blood of our people. The child you bear, They will be the bridge, the connection between what was and what will be. His voice grew urgent. You must teach them who they are, where they come from, the language, the stories, the songs. If you do not, our people will truly be gone. Kyla felt the weight of his words settle on her shoulders. I don't know if I remember enough. I was so young when they took me away, when everything fell apart. You remember more than you think, Tahatan said. It is in your blood, in your bones. You just have to reach for it. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He opened it and poured the contents onto the table. A collection of small objects. A carved piece of wood shaped like a bird. A string of beads. A small stone etched with symbols. These belong to your mother, he said quietly. I found them in the ruins of the camp. I have been carrying them ever since, hoping to find you. Kyla picked up the carved bird with trembling fingers. She remembered it. Remembered her mother holding it, running her thumb over the smooth wood while she told stories by the fire. The memories came flooding back. Her mother's voice, the smell of sage burning, the sound of drums in the distance. She pressed the bird to her chest and wept. Tahatan waited until her tears had slowed before speaking again. There is something else you must know. You are not the only one who survived. Your brother, he lives. Kyla's head snapped up. My brother. But he was just a child. I thought he died. He was taken, Tahatan said, sent to one of the boarding schools. But he escaped 2 years ago. He is living now with a family in the Black Hills. He takes a white name, works as a laborer, but he remembers who he is. Kyla could barely breathe. Does he know about me? He knows you were taken to Fort Robinson. He does not know you escaped, does not know you are here. Tahatan leaned forward. I can get word to him. Tell him you are alive, if you want. Kyla's mind was spinning. A brother. Alive. After all this time. Before she could answer, the door opened. Daniel stepped inside, his eyes immediately going to Tahatan. His hand moved instinctively toward the rifle hanging by the door, but Kyla stood quickly. It's all right, she said. He's family. Daniel's hand dropped, but his posture remained tense. Kyla introduced them, explaining who Tahatan was and why he had come. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. You're welcome here, he said to Tahatan, for as long as you need. Tahatan studied Daniel for a long moment. You are the soldier, the one from Slim Buttes. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he did not look away. I am. And yet you protect her, care for her. Why? Because it's the right thing to do, Daniel said simply. And because I love her. Tahatan nodded slowly. Love is not enough. Not in this world. But it is a start. He turned back to Kyla. I will stay nearby for a few days. There are things I must teach you. Songs you must remember. Words you must not forget. Over the next week, Tahatan came to the house each day. He sat with Kyla by the fire and sang the old songs, taught her the words she had forgotten, told her the stories of their people, of the ancestors of the land that had been taken from them. Kyla absorbed it all, repeating the words until they felt natural on her tongue again, until the language of her childhood came back to her in full. Daniel watched from a distance, never intruding but always present. He listened to the songs, learned a few words himself, and began to understand the weight of what Kyla was carrying. One evening, as Tahatan prepared to leave for the night, he turned to Kyla. The child. Have you thought about what you will name them? Kyla shook her head. Not yet. When the time comes, give them a name in both tongues. Let them carry both worlds in their name. It will remind them of who they are. He placed a hand on her belly, his eyes closing. This child will be strong, like you, and they will carry the hope of our people into the future. That night, after Tahatan had gone, Kyla and Daniel lay in bed together, her back pressed against his chest, his hand resting on her swollen stomach. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Kyla was silent for a moment. "I don't know. I feel like I've been given something precious, but also something impossibly heavy. The responsibility, yes, to keep our culture alive, to teach this child things I'm not sure I fully understand myself." Daniel's hand moved in slow circles on her belly. "You don't have to do it alone. I'll help, however I can." Kyla turned in his arms to face him. "You're not Apache. You don't know the language, the stories, the traditions." "No," Daniel agreed. "But I can learn, and I can make sure our child knows that both parts of them matter, the Apache and the white, that they don't have to choose between them." Kyla felt tears slide down her cheeks again. "I'm afraid," she whispered, "afraid that I won't be enough, that I'll fail them." "You won't," Daniel said firmly, "because you care, because you're trying. That's what matters." They held each other in the darkness, two people carrying the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. But in that moment, they had each other, and that was enough. The next morning, Kyla woke to shouting. She sat up quickly, her heart pounding. Daniel was already out of bed, pulling on his boots and reaching for his rifle. "Stay here," he said. But Kyla was already moving. She threw on a robe and followed him to the window. Outside, 3 men on horseback surrounded Tahatan. One of them had dismounted and was pulling Tahatan from his horse, shoving him to the ground. Marshal Dalton stood to the side, watching. "What is he doing on white land?" Dalton called out. "This territory is closed to natives without permits." Tahatan did not resist. He simply stood, his face calm and dignified. "I am visiting family," he said. Dalton's eyes flicked to the house, then back to Tahatan. "Family? What family?" Daniel stepped out onto the porch, his rifle in hand but not raised. "He's visiting my wife. He's her uncle." Dalton's smile was cold. "Is that so funny? I don't remember seeing any family mentioned in your wife's records." "She doesn't need your permission to have family," Daniel said evenly. Dalton walked closer to the porch. "No, but he needs a permit to be here. And since he doesn't have one, I'm within my rights to arrest him for trespassing." Kyla stepped out onto the porch beside Daniel, her hand resting on her belly. "Please," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "He's an old man. He's done nothing wrong." Dalton's eyes moved to her stomach, then back to her face. "You're pregnant." It was not a question. "I am," Kyla said. Dalton nodded slowly. "Interesting. Very interesting." He turned to his men. "Take the old man to town. Hold him until I can verify his story." "No," Kyla said sharply. Dalton looked at her, his eyebrows raised. "No. He's telling the truth. He's my family, and you have no right to arrest him." Dalton stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I have every right. And unless you want to join him in a cell, I suggest you step back inside." Daniel's grip tightened on the rifle. Dalton saw the movement and smiled. "Go ahead, Mr. Reed. Give me a reason." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then Martha's voice cut through the silence. "That won't be necessary, Marshal." Everyone turned. Martha was walking up the road, a folded document in her hand. Behind her, the mercantile owner and the blacksmith followed. She walked right up to Dalton and handed him the paper. "This is a signed affidavit from the Territorial Governor's office. It grants temporary residence permits to family members of registered citizens. Mrs. Reed is a registered citizen. Her uncle qualifies for protection under this statute." Dalton unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the text. "How convenient." "When did you get this?" "Last month," Martha said, "when I heard there might be trouble." It was a lie. Kyla could see it in Martha's eyes. But Dalton could not prove it. He folded the paper and handed it back to her. "This doesn't change anything. I'm still watching, and when I find proof, and I will find proof, all of you will answer for it." He turned to his men. "Let him go." They released Tahatan, who straightened slowly, his dignity intact despite the rough treatment. Dalton mounted his horse and looked down at Kyla. "Enjoy your family visit, Mrs. Reed, while it lasts." Then he rode away, his men following. The moment they were out of sight, Kyla's legs gave out. Daniel caught her, holding her steady as she gasped for air. "It's all right," he murmured. "It's over. You're safe." But Kyla knew the truth. It was not over. It would never be over. Not until Dalton was gone. Or they were. Spring arrived reluctantly 3 days after Dalton's confrontation with Tahatan. The thaw came suddenly, heavy rains turning the prairie from white to mud, the frozen ground releasing its grip. The temperature fluctuated wildly, warm days followed by freezing nights, the last gasps of winter refusing to let go. Daniel spent hours each day hauling water from the creek. The barrel outside finally thawed, but the road to town still treacherous with mud. Kyla's body grew heavier with each passing week. Her belly was enormous now, stretching the fabric of her dresses to their limits. She moved slowly, carefully, one hand always resting on the curve of her stomach, where the baby pushed and kicked with increasing vigor. The child was restless, constantly moving as if already impatient to enter the world. Sometimes the movements were so strong they took Kyla's breath away, made her gasp, and press her hand against her ribs where small feet seemed determined to break through. Martha came despite the snow, riding through drifts that reached her horse's knees. She examined Kyla with practiced hands, measuring the swell of her belly, listening to the strong, steady heartbeat beneath her skin. "Any day now," she said one afternoon in late April, wiping rain from her coat as she stepped inside. "The baby's positioned right, head down, ready to meet the world." Kyla felt a flutter of fear in her chest. What if something goes wrong? What if my body? What if I'm too different? Martha squeezed her hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "I've delivered dozens of babies, Kyla. Big mothers, small mothers, young mothers, old mothers. Every body is different, and every body knows what to do when the time comes." But Kyla could not shake the fear. She had heard stories whispered among the women of her tribe, stories of mothers who bled to death, of babies born blue and still, of labor that went on for days until both mother and child were lost. And she was not like other women. Her height, her size, everything about her body was outside the normal range. What if that made it harder? What if her body fought against itself? Daniel saw the fear in her eyes every night. He tried to comfort her, holding her close, whispering reassurances into her hair. But she could hear the uncertainty in his voice too, the worry he tried to hide. They were both terrified. Tahatan stayed nearby, camping in a small shelter he had built deep in the cottonwoods where the trees broke the worst of the wind. He came to the house each day bringing firewood. He had split rabbits, he had trapped herbs he had gathered before the first snow. And every evening he sat with Kyla by the fire and taught her. He taught her the songs her mother had sung, the prayers for safe birth, the words to speak over a new child to welcome them into the world and ask the spirits to protect them. "Your mother sang these words over you," he said one night, his voice rough but gentle. "Even though the midwives told her you would not survive, even though they said your body was wrong, that you were too big, too strange." Kyla looked at him, her throat tight. But she did not listen to them. "She sang to you every night. She told you that you were strong, that you would survive. And you did." He reached across and placed his weathered hand over hers. "You have her strength in your blood, in your bones, and you will pass it to your child." Kyla wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the certainty he seemed to carry in every word, but all she felt was the weight of the unknown pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. One night, about a week before the baby came, Tahatan told her something she had not known. "Your brother," he said quietly. "He is coming." Kyla's head snapped up. "What?" "I sent word to him, told him you were here, that you were alive, that you were about to bring new life into the world." Kyla felt tears spring to her eyes. When will he be here?" "Soon. He is traveling slowly because of the snow. But he will come. He wants to meet his sister, to see the child who carries our bloodline forward." That night, Kyla could not sleep. The baby's movements kept her awake, sharp and insistent, but it was more than that. The thought that her brother, the only family she had left besides this child growing inside her, was alive and coming to see her, it filled her with a joy so fierce it was almost painful. She lay in bed beside Daniel, one hand on her belly, the other clutching his. "Daniel," she whispered into the darkness. "I'm here," he murmured, half asleep. "If something happens to me during the birth, if I don't make it through this—" Daniel's eyes opened fully, suddenly alert. "Don't talk like that." "I have to," Kyla said, her voice steady despite the fear. "I need you to promise me something." She turned to face him in the darkness, her eyes finding his. "Promise me you'll teach the baby about their heritage, about who I was, where I came from. Promise me you'll make sure they know they're Apache, even if I'm not here to tell them myself." Daniel's hand tightened around hers almost painfully. "Nothing's going to happen to you. You're going to be fine, both of you. Promise me," Kyla insisted, her voice breaking. Daniel pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her as best he could with her swollen belly between them. "I promise. But you're going to be here to teach them yourself. I'm not losing you, not now, not after everything we've been through, not ever." Kyla pressed her face against his chest and let herself cry. All the fear, all the uncertainty, all the weight of everything she carried, it poured out of her in quiet, shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her bones. And Daniel held her through it all, his own tears falling silent into her hair. The labor began just after midnight on a night when spring storms raged across the prairie, wind and rain howling like something alive and furious. Kyla woke to a sharp pain in her lower back so intense it felt like someone had driven a knife between her vertebrae. She lay still for a moment, waiting to see if it would pass, hoping it was just the baby shifting position. It did not pass. Another pain came stronger this time, wrapping around her belly and squeezing like a giant fist. She gasped, her hands gripping the sheets. "Daniel," she managed. He was awake instantly, sitting up, his hand going to her shoulder. "What is it? What's wrong?" "The baby," Kyla gasped as another contraction hit. "It's coming." Daniel was out of bed in seconds, pulling on his clothes with fumbling fingers, lighting lamps with shaking hands. He stoked the fire until it roared, filling the house with heat and light. Then he pulled on his coat and ran out into the snow to get Martha. Kyla tried to stand, but the pain drove her back to the bed. She gripped the sheets, breathing hard, trying to remember everything Martha had told her. "Breathe through it. Don't fight it. Let your body do the work." But her body felt like it was tearing itself apart from the inside. Martha arrived within 20 minutes, rain soaking through her coat, her medical bag clutched in one hand. She came straight to Kyla's side, her hands already moving to examine her, checking the position of the baby, the dilation, the strength of the contractions. "How far apart are the pains?" "I don't know." Kyla gasped, her face slick with sweat despite the cold. "They just keep coming." Martha's face remained calm, but Kyla saw the flicker of concern in her eyes. The contractions were coming too fast, too close together. This baby was in a hurry. "All right, let's get you comfortable. We're going to get through this together." The hours that followed blurred into a haze of pain and exhaustion that seemed to have no end. Kyla lost track of time, lost track of everything except the relentless contractions that came one after another, each one stronger than the last, each one pushing her closer to the edge of what she thought she could endure. Martha stayed beside her, a constant presence, guiding her through each wave, telling her when to breathe, when to push, when to rest. Her voice was steady, unshakable, an anchor in the storm. Daniel stood at the head of the bed holding Kyla's hand, his face pale, but his grip strong. He did not flinch when she squeezed so hard she thought she might break his fingers. He just held on, murmuring words of encouragement that she could barely hear over the roaring in her ears. "You're doing so well. You're so strong. I'm right here. I'm not leaving." But Kyla did not feel strong. She felt like she was breaking, like her body was being pulled apart, split open, destroyed by the force of this new life trying to enter the world. The pain was beyond anything she had imagined, beyond anything she thought a person could survive. But she did survive, because she had no choice, because this baby needed her to survive. Just when she thought she could not take any more, when she thought her body would give out completely, and she would die right here in this bed, Martha's voice cut through the fog of agony. "One more push, Kyla. The baby's almost here. I can see the head. One more big push." Kyla gathered every ounce of strength she had left, every shred of will, and pushed with everything she had. And then suddenly the pressure released. The pain did not stop, but it changed, became something different, something manageable. And a sharp, indignant cry filled the room. Kyla collapsed back against the pillows, her body shaking violently, her breath coming in ragged, tearing gasps. She felt like she had just fought a battle and barely won. Martha worked quickly, her hands sure, and practiced cleaning the baby's airways, checking fingers and toes, examining every inch of the tiny body. A moment later she laid a small, wet, squirming bundle on Kyla's chest. "A girl," Martha said, her voice thick with emotion, tears streaming down her weathered face. "A healthy, perfect, beautiful girl." Kyla looked down at the tiny face, at the dark eyes that blinked up at her with what seemed like curiosity, at the small fists waving in the air as if already ready to fight the world. Her daughter, her child, the continuation of a line that should have ended in fire and blood. Tears streamed down Kyla's face as she touched the baby's cheek with trembling fingers. The skin was impossibly soft, impossibly warm. "Hello," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Hello, little one. I'm your mother." Daniel leaned over them, his own eyes wet with tears he did not bother to hide. He touched the baby's hand with one finger, and tiny fingers immediately curled around it, gripping tight. "She's perfect," he breathed, his voice full of wonder. "She's absolutely perfect." Martha finished cleaning the baby and wrapped her in a soft blanket that one of the church women had brought. Then she stepped back, giving them space, wiping her own eyes. "I'll give you three some time together. Call me if you need anything." She left the room quietly, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Kyla and Daniel sat together on the bed, their daughter between them, and for a long moment neither of them could speak. They just looked at this tiny person they had created, this life that had come from their brokenness, their pain, their unlikely and impossible love. This child who was half Apache, half white, fully, both fully, neither fully, herself. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice rough. "What should we name her?" Kyla thought of Tahatan's words. A name in both tongues, a name that would carry both worlds, a name that would remind her always of who she was. "Ruth," she said softly, the name coming to her fully formed. "Ruth Nalnish." Daniel looked at her, his eyes questioning. "What does Nalnish mean?" "It means she works," Kyla said, running her finger gently over the baby's tiny hand. "In my language, in Apache, it's a name of strength, of purpose, of someone who builds and creates and does not give up." Daniel smiled, tears still running down his face. "Ruth Nalnish Reed. It's perfect. She's perfect." They spent the rest of the night watching Ruth sleep, marveling at her tiny features, her miniature fingers and toes, the way her chest rose and fell with each breath, the way she frowned in her sleep as if already puzzling out the mysteries of the world. Kyla had never felt anything like this overwhelming, consuming love, this fierce protectiveness that made her want to build walls around this child to shield her from every hurt, every danger, every cruel word. This desperate need to keep this small person safe from a world that had tried so hard to destroy people like them. As dawn began to break outside the storm clearing to reveal the mud-streaked prairie washed clean by rain painted in shades of pink and gold, Kyla whispered to her sleeping daughter, "I will teach you everything I know. I will tell you stories of our people, of the grandmothers and grandfathers who came before. I will sing you the songs my mother sang to me. I will teach you the language that they tried to take from us." She paused, her voice dropping even lower. "And I will make sure you know that you are loved. Always. No matter what. You are loved." Ruth stirred in her sleep, her small mouth working, and Kyla felt her heart swell until it felt too big for her chest, until she thought she might break apart from the sheer force of this love. Over the next few days, visitors came despite the muddy roads and unpredictable spring weather. Martha returned daily to check on both mother and baby, teaching Kyla how to nurse, how to swaddle, how to recognize the different cries and what they meant, how to trust her instincts. Tahatan came with gifts he had made with his own hands. A small cradle carved from cottonwood, every edge smoothed until it was soft as silk. A blanket woven from rabbit fur, warm and impossibly soft. And a tiny beaded pouch filled with sacred herbs to hang above Ruth's bed for protection against evil spirits and bad dreams. He held Ruth for a long time, tears running down his weathered face, whispering prayers in Apache over her tiny head. "You are the hope of our people," he told her, though she was far too young to understand. "You carry us forward. You are the bridge." Even some of the townspeople stopped by people who had once stared at Kyla with suspicion and fear. The mercantile owner brought food jars of preserves and smoked meat to help them through the winter. The blacksmith's wife brought baby clothes her own children had outgrown. The women from the church brought blankets and kind words and casseroles. Kyla was overwhelmed by the generosity. By the way, these people who had once seen her as an outsider, a threat, now welcomed her child with open arms and warm hearts. For a brief, shining moment, she allowed herself to hope that maybe things would be all right, that maybe they could build a life here, that maybe Ruth could grow up safe and loved. But the peace did not last. 1 week after Ruth's birth, on a gray morning when spring rain drummed against the roof, Marshal Dalton returned. Kyla was nursing Ruth by the fire, the baby's small sounds of contentment, the only noise in the quiet house, when she heard the horses. Multiple horses moving slowly up the road. Her heart immediately began to race, her body flooding with fear. Daniel heard them too. He moved to the window, his hand automatically going to the rifle that now hung permanently by the door, loaded and ready. "It's Dalton," he said quietly, his voice tense. "And he brought more men this time. 5, maybe 6. Kyla wrapped Ruth more tightly in her blanket and stood on shaking legs, her body still weak from the birth. Daniel turned to her, his face grave. "Take Ruth to the back room. Lock the door. Don't come out until I say it's safe." "Daniel, I can't just hide while you face them alone." "You have to," Daniel said, his voice urgent, almost desperate. "I need to know you're both safe. Please, Kyla. Please." Kyla nodded, unable to speak past the fear choking her throat. She hurried to the bedroom, Ruth clutched against her chest, and locked the door with trembling fingers. She sat on the bed, her back against the wall, Ruth nursing peacefully, completely unaware of the danger gathering outside. Kyla could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears so loud she was sure Dalton would hear it through the walls. She heard the front door open, heard heavy boots on the wooden floor, heard Dalton's voice cold and triumphant, the voice of a man who thought he had finally won. "Mr. Reed, I think it's time we had an honest conversation." "What do you want, Dalton?" Daniel's voice was steady, but Kyla could hear the tension underneath. "I want the truth, and I think I've finally found enough of it to force your hand." There was a rustling of paper, the sound of something being unfolded. "This is a detailed report from Fort Robinson. Description of the escaped prisoner. Height approximately 7 feet 3 inches. Distinctive tribal tattoo on left shoulder depicting an Apache clan symbol. Dark hair, dark eyes, multiple scars on wrists from restraints." Kyla's blood ran cold. Her hand unconsciously moved to her shoulder where the tattoo lay hidden beneath her dress. "But here's the interesting part." Dalton continued, his voice taking on a quality of satisfaction that made Kyla's stomach turn. "The report mentions that the prisoner was examined by military doctors who concluded she was barren, incapable of bearing children due to her unusual physical development." A pause. Kyla could imagine Dalton's smile. But your wife just gave birth, didn't she? I heard the news from half a dozen people. A healthy baby girl, they said. Quite the miracle, wouldn't you say? Daniel's voice was like stone. What's your point, Marshal? My point is that either the military's information was catastrophically wrong, which seems unlikely given their thoroughness, or your wife is not who you claim she is. Or perhaps your wife is exactly who I think she is, and the doctors were simply mistaken. There was a long, tense silence. Kyla held her breath, Ruth's small body warm and trusting against her chest. Then Dalton spoke again, his voice dropping to something almost conversational, which somehow made it more threatening. I'm giving you one chance, Reed. One final chance to tell me the truth. Is your wife the escaped prisoner, Kyla Naaki from Fort Robinson? The woman who murdered Private James Hartley? Yes or no? Kyla closed her eyes, waiting for Daniel's answer, knowing that whatever he said would change everything. And then, to her shock, she heard Martha's voice, sharp and commanding. That's quite enough, Marshal Dalton. Footsteps. Multiple people entering the house. Kyla's eyes flew open. Mrs. Brennan, Dalton said, his voice tight with annoyance. This is official federal business. You have no right to interfere. And you have no right to harass a new mother and her week-old baby, Martha shot back. What you're doing constitutes intimidation and unlawful search without proper warrant or evidence. I have evidence right here, Dalton said. You have a report about someone who might fit a general description. That's not evidence. That's supposition and prejudice. Another voice joined in, the mercantile owner, his tone firm. She's right, Marshal. You've been after this family for months now with nothing but circumstantial nonsense. Mrs. Reed is tall, Mrs. Reed is Apache. So what neither of those things makes her a criminal. More voices. The blacksmith. Two women from the church. The saloon keeper. People Kyla barely knew. People she had spoken to perhaps once or twice. All of them were here. All of them were defending her. Dalton's frustration was clear in his voice. You're all fools. You're protecting a murderer. And when the truth comes out, and it will come out, you'll all be considered accomplices. You could all face federal charges for harboring a fugitive. Then bring those charges, Martha said, her voice like steel. But until you have actual verifiable proof, not just suspicious reports and biased assumptions, you need to leave these people alone. There's a new mother in that back room who needs rest and peace, not armed men stomping through her house making wild accusations. There was a tense silence that seemed to stretch forever. Then Dalton's boots crossed the floor toward the door. But before he left, his voice came one last time, cold and certain. This isn't over, Mrs. Brennan, not by a long shot. I'll be back. And next time I'll have everything I need to prove what I already know. Then we'll see you when you have proof, Martha said calmly. Until then, goodbye, Marshal. The door slammed. Kyla heard horses moving away, the sound gradually fading into the distance. She sat frozen for a long moment, Ruth still nursing peacefully, completely unaware that her entire existence had just been threatened. Then the bedroom door opened carefully. Daniel stood there, his face pale but his eyes fierce with protective fury. It's over, he said. He's gone. But Kyla shook her head slowly. It's not over. You heard him. He'll come back. And next time he might have proof we can't explain away. She looked down at Ruth, at this perfect, innocent child who had done nothing wrong except be born. What are we going to do? Daniel crossed the room and sat beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. We're going to protect our family, whatever it takes. Kyla walked out into the main room a few minutes later, Ruth cradled in her arms. Martha stood there with nearly a dozen townspeople, all of them looking at her with expressions that ranged from concern to determination to something that looked almost like defiance. Martha stepped forward, her eyes meeting Kyla's directly. "We know who you are," she said quietly, so only Kyla could hear. "Or at least we've figured it out, and we don't care." Kyla felt tears burn her eyes. "You're risking everything for me, for us. Why?" Martha glanced at Ruth, then back at Kyla. "Because some things are worth the risk. Because what was done to you, to your people, was wrong. and because that baby deserves a chance to grow up with her mother." She looked around at the others, her voice rising slightly. "We've decided, all of us, that we're not going to let Dalton or anyone else take you. You're Ruth's mother, Daniel's wife, and you're part of this community. That's all that matters." The mercantile owner nodded. "We've already started preparing. If Dalton comes back with federal marshals, we have a plan. Martha's network can get you to safety before they even get close." "But your homes," Kyla said, her voice breaking. "Your businesses. If they find out you helped me, you could lose everything." The blacksmith's wife spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. "Then we lose everything. Some things are more important than property or money, like doing what's right, like protecting a mother and her child." Kyla could not speak, could not find words big enough for what she was feeling, so she simply nodded, tears streaming down her face, and held Ruth a little closer. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Kyla woke to the sound of a horse approaching. She tensed immediately, her hand moving to Ruth's cradle, but Daniel was already at the window. "It's not Dalton," he said quietly. "It's a young man. Alone. Kyla, he looks like you." Kyla's heart stopped. She moved to the window, Ruth in her arms, and looked out at the rider dismounting in the muddy yard. He was perhaps 30 tall, but not as tall as she was, with the same dark eyes, the same sharp cheekbones, the same set to his jaw. He wore white man's clothes, a worker's canvas jacket, and worn boots, his black hair cut short in the white style. But when he looked up at the house, when his eyes found hers through the window, she knew. She knew. Kyla handed Ruth to Daniel and walked to the door on trembling legs. She opened it and stepped onto the porch. The man stood frozen in the yard, staring at her. "Kyla," he said, his voice breaking on her name. "Naki," she whispered. "Little brother." He took a step forward, then another. Then he was running and she was running, and they met in the muddy yard and held each other while the morning light broke over the prairie. "They told me you were dead," he said in Apache, the language rough on his tongue after years of disuse. "At the boarding school they said everyone from our band was dead, that I was the only one left." "I thought the same," Kyla said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "I thought I was alone." They stood there for a long time, two survivors of a massacre that should have left no one alive, holding on to each other like drowning people holding on to driftwood. Finally they pulled apart. Naki looked at the house, at Daniel standing in the doorway with Ruth in his arms. "Is that—" he started. "My daughter," Kyla said. "Ruth. And that's my husband, Daniel." Naki's eyes widened. He looked at Kyla, questions written all over his face. "It's a long story," she said. "Come inside, we have time now." He stayed for 3 days. He met Ruth and held her with the careful reverence of someone who had never held a baby before. He sat with Tahatan by the fire and sang the old songs, his voice cracking on words he had not spoken in a decade. He listened to Kyla's story and Daniel's and Martha's, and when he learned what they had all done to protect her, tears ran down his face. "I work at a lumber mill in the Black Hills," he told them on the second night. "I go by Nathan Reed now. It's safer that way. But I remember who I am, who we are." He looked at Ruth sleeping peacefully in her cradle. "And she will know too. I'll make sure of it. When it's safe, when Dalton is gone, I'll come back. I'll teach her the things I remember, the things we can't let die." On the morning of the 4th day, he prepared to leave. He held Kyla one more time, his arms tight around her. "You're not alone anymore," he said. "Neither of us is. Remember that." "I will," Kyla promised. She stood on the porch with Daniel beside her and Ruth in her arms, watching her brother ride away into the morning mist. He turned once to wave, and then he was gone, disappearing into the trees. But he would be back. And until then she had his promise, had the knowledge that somewhere out there another piece of her family still survived, still fought, still remembered. After everyone had left, after the house had settled back into quiet, Kyla and Daniel sat together by the fire, Ruth sleeping in the beautiful cradle Tahatan had made. "We can't stay here forever," Kyla said quietly, finally voicing the truth they had both been avoiding. Daniel was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. Then he looked at her, his eyes clear and certain. "No," he agreed. "We can't." 3 weeks later, Martha came in the dead of night. She did not knock, just opened the door and stepped inside, her face grave in the lamplight. "Dalton has a federal warrant," she said without preamble, Signed by a judge in Fort Robinson. He'll be here by dawn with a full marshal's company. They'll search the house, they'll examine you, and when they find that tattoo—" She did not need to finish. Kyla looked around the small house that had become her home. The table where she and Daniel had shared their first meal, the bedroom where Ruth had been born, the cradle Tahatan had carved with such love. "How long do we have?" Daniel asked. 2 hours, maybe 3 if the rain slows them. Daniel was already moving, pulling down the bag they had packed weeks ago in preparation for this moment. Kyla wrapped Ruth in warm blankets, the baby stirring but not waking. Martha handed Daniel a folded map. "Follow the river north for 2 days. There's a family there, the Johnsons. They'll take you and no questions asked. After that, head west to the Montana border. I have contacts there who can help you disappear completely." She pressed a small pouch of coins into Kyla's hand. "This should get you started. And this," she added, handing over a folded document, "is a letter of introduction. It'll help with the families along the network." Kyla pulled Martha into a fierce embrace. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for seeing me when no one else would, for protecting us." Martha's eyes were wet when they pulled apart. "You protected yourself. I just tried to make up for the times I didn't help when I should have." She looked down at Ruth sleeping peacefully in Kyla's arms. "Teach her everything. Don't let them erase who you are, who she is." "I won't," Kyla promised. Tahatan appeared from the shadows outside, leading 2 horses already saddled and packed. "The old paths through the hills," he said. "They will not think to look there. I will guide you for the first day, then return to cover your trail." Daniel gripped the old man's shoulder. "Thank you." Tahatan nodded, then turned to Kyla. He placed his weathered hand on Ruth's head, speaking a blessing in Apache words of protection and strength. "She carries us all forward," he said. "Our past, our future, teach her to be proud of both." As the first hint of gray touched the eastern sky, they mounted the horses. Kyla held Ruth close, feeling the baby's warmth against her chest. Daniel rode beside her, his hand reaching out to touch her arm, once a silent promise. Martha and Tahatan stood in the yard watching them go. Kyla looked back once at the small house, at the life they were leaving behind. But when she turned forward again toward the dark line of hills and the unknown road ahead, she felt something unexpected. Not fear, hope. The last daughter of fire had survived the flames. She had found love in the ashes. She had brought forth new life from death. And now, with her husband beside her and her daughter in her arms, she rode toward a horizon that was hers to write, not running from the past, but riding toward the future. Behind them, the first light of dawn touched the prairie, painting the wet grass gold. The house stood empty, a shelter that had served its purpose. Ahead the path wound through the hills, disappearing into morning mist. Unknown, uncertain, but theirs. And in Kyla's arms, Ruth Nalnish Reed slept peacefully, unaware that she was already writing the next chapter of a story that refused to end. A story of survival, of resistance, of 2 worlds becoming one in the body of a child who would carry them both forward into a future where neither had to be forgotten. The last daughter of fire rode into the dawn, and the future rode with her.